Oh, it was a fiery press briefing today. So, we're going to talk about that. And also, I've got some other interesting stuff about presidential powers and the Supreme Court. So, stick with me and I'll be right back. Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and oh boy, just lots and lots of stuff going on here. Major things. It was quite a press briefing today, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I wanted to start out with this because, hey, this is from our Border Patrol. Look what's going on. This is an update on our wall progress. 158 miles completed, 192 miles under construction, and 403 miles in pre-construction. So yeah, that's what's happening. Isn't it amazing? Look how much they've used. 209,000 tons of steel and 317,000 tons of concrete. Wow. Or well, actually cubic yards. Sorry about that. Concrete comes a little differently. They don't worry about the weight so much. But anyway, I wanted to share that with you. I thought it was interesting. And I thought it'd be something that if you're on Twitter, you might want to share that because, I know it may seem kind of strange, but if you're on Twitter and you share things that are positive and, showing what's really going on with our government, it does make a difference because a lot of times people don't get the straight truth from the mainstream media and they may need other sources to be able to communicate to them. So there you go. That was pretty good. And, even if you have like Facebook instead of Twitter, you can right click this and then save it. And then you can share it on Facebook. Even if you don't have a Twitter account, you can still go in and, use the links that I put in down below for that. So remember, I put them down in the description. So you have to make sure that you check out the description, pop it open with that little triangle if you're on a mobile device. If not, just the show more, and that will take you there. Open it up so you can see it. In the press conference today, it was quite a fiery little time because one of the things that the press wanted to try to push in their little agenda with their questions was that Trump did nothing while, everything was happening with the coronavirus and Trump was not doing a thing. That's the current narrative out there in the mainstream media. Well, this totally blows it away. And this woman right here is principal deputy communications director of the Team Trump. So she knows what she's talking about. But if you go through, you can look at this and you can see all the various things. It's a little small, granted, on that. And by the way, she did say deploying testing kids. And it was supposed to be kids. She did change it down here. So yeah, not kids. Anyway, so this is one source, but here's another source if you want to see the Trump War Room, because they had this document, which again is a little easier to read. But if you want to see the real good one, you click on this link and it takes you here, and then you can share this. So however you share it, whatever social media you're on, share these kinds of things because it does make a difference. And one of the reasons that I put these materials out there is because I want to provide ammunition, if you want to put it that way, for you to send out information. It's information ammunition, which that is very important. We need to get the truth out there. And, you can share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter. Let's use whatever access we have to be able to spread the truth. And so one of the points in the conference, besides a video thing about the press, which I'll show you in just a minute. But one of the things that they were complaining about is that Trump made a statement that he has the authority to open up the states and not the governors. The governors technically do not have the authority to say when their businesses and everything start opening up. So kind of interesting. And of course, that made the press go crazy because he stated it a couple times that he had a very strong authority to be able to do this. Now, one of the things that you've probably noticed if you've been watching these briefings is that President Trump talks about it being war and that we are at war with this invisible enemy. Well, that's very important language, folks. It's more than just him saying that or giving you an idea of how strong a battle this is. No, this is very important legally for him to be saying this and to have declared essentially a federal state of emergency because now all 50 states have a state of emergency. So all of that is being set up because in doing so, it has given him some very special powers that he didn't have before. And in case you haven't noticed, the Trump team is really good at finding out the legal aspects of this and making sure that everything they do, every step they take, is legal, perfectly legal. That's what they're really trying to do, is stay totally within the law, unlike the previous administration that didn't seem to care anything about the law or the Constitution, and the Trump team is trying to stay within the Constitution. So it says here, under the Constitution, the federal government has extensive power to regulate interstate commerce. A number of Supreme Court decisions have interpreted this to mean the federal government has virtually unlimited powers over economic matters, even if they have little to no direct impact on commerce between the states. This is the point of view from this Breitbart article, and here was what President Trump tweeted out. For the purpose of creating conflict and confusion, some in the fake news media are saying that it is the governor's decision to open up the states, not that of the President of the United States and the federal government. Let it be fully understood that this is incorrect. It is the decision of the president, and for many good reasons. With that being said, the administration and I are working closely with the governors, and this will continue. A decision by me, in conjunction with the governors and input from others, will be made shortly. Okay, so that's the point that they're looking at here, but I think maybe this article right here might give us a clue as to what's really going on. Because this is an article that was written, it's a Journal of Law and Health here, and it was published Cleveland Marshall College of Law Library is where it's at. It's by Joshua L. Friedman. I tried looking him up, and about the only thing I could see is that he worked for the Social Security Administration. And that's, it was hard finding him because there's a lot of Joshua Friedmans, and some of them were not the correct one. And so, yeah, anyway. This particular article that was written in 2012, Emergency Powers of the Executive, the President's Authority. So, let's see what this has to say. Down here, and it's kind of a long article, it's 43 pages, so I won't access all of it. And since it was in a journal, of course, the numbers on the pages were different, because the journal is much longer than just 43 pages. But if you see here from this table of contents, you can see that he goes through the executive commander-in-chief powers, judicial oversight of executive powers, legislative oversight of executive powers, and then goes on to some of the specifics here and emergence of related cases, public health legislation, etc. So we're just going to hit on some of the highlights here near the beginning, and I'll leave the document down below if you want to read it. Here's the actual guy. He had got an MBA from University of Baltimore, and then his JD was in from the University of Maryland, Francis King Carey School of Law. So anyway, and he did work for the Social Security Administration, Office of Disability Adjudication and Review. All right. So that is who he is. That was the most I could really find. And then this is where it gets into it. And I want to show you on this page. I'm just going to pick and choose. I know that's not necessarily good, but it is kind of long, and I want to give you just some highlights here. This paragraph right here. The president must also have the latitude to act with decision, activity, secrecy, and dispatch. This completely autonomous executive decision is sometimes tempered by the constitutional principle of checks and balances, such as the congressional and judicial oversight on executive authority, whether via legislation, inherent powers, or vis-a-vis presidential deference. Finally, this article endeavors to answer the profound question that continually faces this nation in both past and present crises. In an emergency scenario, whether it be a terrorist attack, health crisis, or a natural environmental disaster, how broad, or rather, how substantive are the president's enumerated emergency powers? So that's essentially what he's going to be addressing in this entire document. And obviously, if you want to read the whole thing, as always, like I said, it'll be down below. But in this, as you're going through, there's just some important things to point out. Let's look at this. Ultimately, this article posits that the broad grant of executive authority in exigent circumstances is warranted. Quote, with no time for ex ante deliberation and no metric for ex post assessments, the executive's capacities for swift, vigorous, and secretive action are at a premium. The executive must be ready, willing, and able to act immediately following a national disaster such as a public health emergency where quarantine or isolation principles require the immediate segregation of the populace, presumably against their wishes. In such a case where the executive acts in favor of the whole, he must not be unduly hindered by judicial review or congressional authority. This was written in 2012, folks, so this is not specifically for this time, but yet it addresses exactly what we're going through, because quarantine and isolation principles, the president has to be free to act on that. And he has said before at his briefings that he has the ability to just shut down every state if he wants to, but he's been leaving it in the hands of the governors, which is kind of ironic because the Democrats and the left-wing media always want to say that he wants to be a dictator, but yet he's not taking the steps that he could because it's allowed under the Constitution, actually, but he doesn't take those steps. He's letting other people address the situation. And especially with the governors, he's trying to let them do what's best for their state. But the ultimate authority as to when this country opens back up, it rests in his hands. Let's go on because there are more I want to show you. I'm going to skip here to 9. The president's constitutional authority flows from both his unique position in the constitutional structure and from the specific grants of authority assigned by Article 2. Which is the Constitution, the part that talks about the executive branch. It is clear that, based on Youngstown, and that's one of the cases that they're referring to in this, and its progeny, in an emergency situation, quote, the president enjoys full discretion in determining what level of force to use when addressing the emergency situation. The president's enumerated powers dictate that he be granted the power to act specifically for the good of the nation in such situations. So it goes on then. The court has held that the president has independent authority and the need to be free from interference in a variety of cases. And of course, it's talking about the Supreme Court here. In Marbury versus Madison, 5 U.S. 137, 1803, Justice Marshall found that, quote, the president is invested with certain important political powers, in the exercise of which he is to use his own discretion and is accountable only to his country in his political character and to his own conscience. Being trusted to the executive, the decision of the executive is conclusive. According to Justice Marshall, the court does not have the jurisdiction to address political questions, including, for example, issues of emergency health situations, foreign affairs, or war-making powers, questions in their nature political or which are, by the Constitution and laws, submitted to the executive can never be made in this court. Okay, so what has been happening, we've been watching this happen. We've talked about it before on this channel. The Democrats have been joining with the courts, kind of ganging up on the executive and slowly, little by little, sucking away the power from the executive branch and putting it more in the legislative branch because the Democrats think that they can have the power over that. It's much easier to control and they have a lot more leeway what, laws they can have and everything. So that's really kind of what's going on. But this right here says, according to this, nope. The Supreme Court cannot step in and rule against the president in this case because the president does have some specific powers when it comes to these emergency situations. Let me continue on here. The court cannot reasonably prevent the executive branch from accomplishing its constitutionally assigned functions. When circumstances arise that may endanger the safety of the nation, constitutional shackles cannot be imposed on the president. The president must be free to act with somewhat unfettered discretion in areas when the court extends judicial review into areas, quote, where it does not know and has no way of finding out what serious harm it may be doing. This reduces the vested responsibility of the executive. So, again, he's laying out the case here little by little, showing how they just don't have a standing to come against him when it has to do with emergency situations. This is the deal. And again, I'm telling you, President Trump has some great lawyers that are keeping him in line. He does absolutely nothing that is not constitutional. He does nothing that is outside of the law at all. Everything has to be according to the law. It has to be according to the Constitution. They always meticulously follow the law. So does the 17th letter of the alphabet. Always. There is no stepping outside the bounds. There's no doing anything illegal to achieve their means. They're not going to do that. Everything has to be done legally. That's how you restore the rule of law. Down here, the president's war-making powers are historically subject to the whim of Congress. While a president requires congressional approval to declare war on a sovereign nation, Congress may later choose to veto the president's declaration of war or deny the president the necessary funds to continue the war. However, in the case of an emergency action, such as a disaster occurring within a state, whereas the president has to send in the National Guard to maintain order, the president's powers must be absolute and not subject to congressional or judicial scrutiny. So again, he's making the case. The Supreme Court should not be able to intervene. The legislative branch cannot intervene. He's just making it very clear here. And then down here, the executive branch has historically taken the position that the War Powers Act is unconstitutional. According to the Justice Department, Section 2C of the War Powers Resolution does not constitute a legally binding definition of presidential authority to deploy our armed forces. Moreover, this legislation is viewed by the executive as, quote, incomplete or is not meaning to be binding. No president has ever acknowledged the constitutionality of the War Powers Resolution, and no president has ever formally complied with its terms in emergencies. In fact, several attorney generals have held that the presidential action in times of emergency is expressly constitutional, quote, without specific prior congressional approval, as long as they are for the purpose of, quote, missions of goodwill or rescue, or for the purpose of protecting American lives or property or American interests. Now, like I said, I could go on and keep pointing out different paragraphs here, but I think you got the idea. Basically, this document, which again was written in 2012, is stating that the executive in times of emergency has more power than what they do normally. The president's powers do fluctuate. They're not always the same because it depends on whether we are in an emergency situation or not. So that's why he's been emphasizing this whole thing about it being a state of emergency. Also about the state of war, because that's going to come into play when the people who were part of this happening are exposed. Then it'll be easier to prove that they were working with the enemy and therefore traitors, right? So that's how that's going to work. And there is a whole section down at the bottom about the health issues specifically, but I just wanted to point all that out to you. I'll leave the document down below. You can read the whole thing if you want to. Well, during this session, of course, Trump had to play a little video, and I'm going to play it for you here. I hope I don't get any strike on the music, but here is the part that he played. You could see how many times the press was saying things that were negative that were just not true. So here's that clip.
Success we're having. Okay, please, you could put it on. Thank you. people should be more concerned right now with the flu in this country.
A lot of people are concerned about the coronavirus because they're hearing a lot of news about it right now. But the reality is, comparing it to the flu, for example, it's not even close to being at that stage.
What if it is worse? Is this a moment where maybe countries put politics aside, a little bit of pride aside, and do we have U.S. officials, should U.S. professionals such as yourself get involved?
How worried should Americans be about coronavirus?
Coronavirus is not going to cause a major issue in the United States.
Well, we've asked them to accelerate whatever they're doing in terms of a vaccine.
We will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. Medicare patients can now visit any doctor by phone or video conference at no additional cost.
The first 1 million masks will be available immediately.
As there were more cases, and it was clear that it was spreading out of China, where it originated, the president took this move that he was widely criticized for by Democrats and even some Republicans at the time, which was he halted a number of flights from China into the U.S. The idea was to halt the spread of the disease, keep transmissions to a minimum. He was accused of xenophobia. He was accused of making a racist move. At the end of the day, it was probably effective because it did actually take a pretty aggressive measure against the spread of the virus.
His team is on it. They've been responsive late at night, early in the morning, and they've thus far been doing everything that they can do, and I want to say thank you. And I want to say that I appreciate it.
He returns calls. He reaches out. He's been proactive. We got that Mercy ship down here in Los Angeles. That was directly because he sent it down here. 2,000 medical units came to the state of California, these FMS, these field medical stations. And that's been very, very helpful.
The president has been outstanding through all this. The vice president's been outstanding. Members of the coronavirus task force, very responsive.
We had asked if we could have, New Jersey could have access to a piece of the beds that are on the USNS Comfort, and the president came back, called me a short few minutes before I walked in here to say indeed they would grant that to New Jersey. So that's a big step for us in addition to all the other capacity. That news is literally hot off the press, and I thank the president and vice president who are on the call together.
President Trump approved Arizona's request for a presidential major disaster declaration. I want to thank the president for a quick turnaround. We requested this on a Wednesday, and we had approval by Saturday morning. And we are grateful to the administration for their continued support and responsiveness.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the president and the vice president for doing a really good job of communicating with all the governors.
And of course, I thought it was pretty funny. These were the chyrons that were they were showing. So they are saying, CNN saying that he was, off and, it's not trending over here anymore, but it was trending angry Trump or Trump meltdown or something like that. It's like, Trump melts down. Yeah, he was not melting down. He was telling the truth. And, one of the things that I think people are missing when he's talking about all of this, he's not so upset about the media saying false things about him. What he's really ticked off about is that the media is insulting all of these first responders and people who have been working very hard, the doctors and the nurses. They're on the front line, and they are putting their lives on the line for everyone else right now. And President Trump is upset that the media is just insulting them and not giving them their due that they should be honored at this time. So if you listen carefully, he always says that. It's just people are not listening carefully enough to him. They think that it's all about him and that's what he's all about. That's not true. He, as a leader, is more concerned about his people, his his men and women that serve under him being disrespected than himself. So that's something that most really good leaders do. But of course, the press isn't going to pick up on that. Here's an article that I wanted to share with you. Now, I'm not 100% sold on this Mercola site, just because sometimes their information is not well documented. So I take everything I read there with a grain of salt. But I already did a study on this, and I found out that it is true that out of all of Italy's deaths, that only 0.8% had no underlying conditions. And it says from an examination of 18% of Italy's deaths, which revealed that only 3 people who died, or 0.8%, had no underlying conditions. Obviously, it's more than 3 now in the total. But the one thing that you have to look at is right here, that out of the fatalities, 76.1% had high blood pressure, 35.5% had diabetes, and 33% had heart disease. So if you are in that category of those 3 particular things, be real careful, okay? You might want to take a few more precautions. That's just what I wanted to point out here to you. But again, I'll leave the link down below and you can read the whole thing for yourself. This is one that I thought was very interesting because in my last video, remember I told you about the churches and the nails in front of the parking lot. I assume it was nail strips probably that they put down to keep people out, which is just crazy in my opinion. But this is what's happening here. And I thought this Federalist article was very apropos. This is what we're starting to see. All these little dictators are being exposed. We have all these different governors. You know, I thought we had a pretty decent governor. Right now, I'm not real happy with the man because he was part of the very strict lockdown stuff. The one up in Michigan won't even let you buy garden seeds. I mean, that's just crazy. How strict do they have to get before we start going, wait a minute, we put you in office and we're not going to put you back? So this is an interesting article I think you may want to read because all of these things are really showing you who our leaders really are. And we're seeing a lot of little tyrants start to pop up. We need to remember that when it comes time to vote. And so anyway, this is another one of the crazy little things going on. This is from the UK. And yeah, there's this shopper who was buying wine during the coronavirus lockdown and potato chips. Well, crisps, but for those of us in the US, potato chips. And yeah, got arrested, got a fine for it because they weren't essential. They're not essential things. And I drove by a store today that said open only for essentials. It's like, well, who are you to decide what's essential to me? And, you know, something that may seem silly could be essential. Like, for instance, my 90-year-old mother had a couple of falling spells. And it was because she and my dad would be watching TV or something. My dad would fall asleep and she would get up and start walking around the house without her walker or, you know, even with her walker. And then she'd end up falling and he was asleep and he didn't know it. So we had to buy a motion sensor to put across where she would walk. So if she walked past him, then it would wake him up. So it may seem to somebody that that wasn't essential, but it was. It was essential for us because she fell like twice, 2 days in a row, and we just can't have her falling. I mean, she hurts herself, and it's not good for Dad. And so it was an essential thing. But if somebody looked at me, they may say, oh, well, that's not essential. You're buying things that aren't essential. That's what, you know, this whole thing has gotten to the point. How do we know? Are we going to have these little police that are going to start looking at what we're buying when we go into a store? I don't know. But this right here, I should have put this probably a little further up, but I got to tell you, this is really concerning me. Okay, now some of you know I've done things before on the Supreme Court. I like to listen to some of the big cases and everything that they have. But they have never done this before. And I think it's not a good reason for them doing it now. What they're going to do is they're going to have a teleconference hearing, and the case will be presented to them. They'll ask questions all through teleconferencing, I guess, and they're going to broadcast live the audio of these cases that are all trying to get Trump's tax information and his financial records. Okay? I think this is very concerning because they've never done this before. They have the audio, but the audio is never live. Never. But now they're doing it live, and I just think it's setting things up for a very bad thing. So, here's what they have to say, Sundance here. The resistance appears to be coming together in a stunning and historic change of protocol. The United States Supreme Court will hold teleconference hearings and will actually live stream broadcast the oral arguments and questions. Two elements are remarkable. And by the way, I just want to know, Ruth, your birthday was March 15th. You said you were going to resign after your birthday. Come on, woman. What you waiting for? Oh, she's not going to get out of there until after the election. I know she's not, because they really think that, they can hold out until then. I mean, it's not that he'd be able to replace her before then anyway, but it would change the balance of the court, because then it would be the 5 conservatives, and then they'd only have 3 of the liberals. And so right now, we do have Roberts here, who is iffy, and you never know which side he's going to fall on. So if we had it that way, then at least you'd have better odds of having it go conservative. But anyway, first, these are the 2 things that Sundance says are historical. First, that the Supreme Court would permit a live stream broadcast of any hearing is historic. The purposeful controls of the court never allowing video, cameras, or live audio broadcasting for their hearings was always justified around the court never wanting to allow politics and media to shape the serious legal issues being debated. Secondly, and perhaps not coincidentally, during this live stream session, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing legal arguments after they consolidated a series of cases targeting the financial and business records of President Donald Trump. The various lawsuits against President Trump are not only going to be heard, they are going to be broadcast. It doesn't get much more political than that. I agree with you on that. And I really think it's kind of scary that these are the cases they're doing. And he's been trying to keep his tax and other financial records away from the idiots in the House that want them for no real reasons. And so the court will hear 10 cases in all between May 4th and May 13th, which, by the way, the court usually ends hearing new cases at the end of April. They don't normally hear cases in May. And then they spend May, June, and July pretty much trying to go over everything and having conferences about how they're going to rule on it and writing their opinions and all of that. So it does take a while for that to happen. And usually the opinions start coming out in June and go through July and sometimes even into August. And then they start again in October is when they come back for their next session. So this is unusual that they're going to be in May, but of course it's because of everything going on. Although I really don't understand why this would be hard, because I think when they sit, from the sketches I've seen, from the pictures of the courtroom, it appears to me that they are sitting far enough apart, or maybe they could spread it out a little bit more so they wouldn't be sitting right next to each other. And the person who is doing the debating, or presenting their arguments, they're like not next to them. So I don't know. I would think they'd be far enough apart that they'd be able to do that. But I guess it's like nobody in our government wants to work except our president. But anyway, in addition to fights over subpoenas for Trump's financial records, they include 2 cases about whether presidential electors are required to cast their electoral college ballots for the candidate who won their state. The court has never live-streamed courtroom arguments, and only rarely has it made the audio available on the same day. Because you've heard my frustration before. It's like, well, I had to wait for a few days for the audio to come up. But because sometimes, you can read the transcript right away, but the audio is you need to hear the people actually say the questions and, make the oral arguments, because you don't know the tone of their voice and everything, and that can change. Transcripts just don't do it when you're listening to any kind of court argument. Most federal appeals courts already have moved to allow arguments by phone, though some cases are being postponed or decided without arguments. The Supreme Court did not indicate when it might decide the cases it will hear in May. The court usually winds up its work for the summer by the end of June and returns to the bench on the first Monday in October. Another 10 cases that were postponed because of the virus outbreak will be argued in the fall. So, they are going to be adjusting. And it says they usually wind up their work for the summer at the end of June. I don't know. I've seen some come out in July, I think. So they don't always get those out that fast, but sometimes they do. Usually they do. So anyway, they're going to have this going on. In December of last year, the Supreme Court granted the petition for a writ of certiorari and said they would hear all cases related to attempts to gain President Trump's financial records and tax filings. And this writ of certiorari just means that it's a petition to them that they will take on that case, because they can't take every case that people want them to take. So they have petitioned, and the certiorari granted means they will take that one. So the Supreme Court issued a stay on all lower court action and consolidated the cases into one writ. The court will hear arguments in May and release a ruling later in the summer of 2020. Right before the election, right? Gearing things up. So I just think it's very strange. And so here's what it all is, that they're putting all that together. And it was, they were trying to get his documents here, his financial stuff. And of course that was, let's see, President Trump went to the Supreme Court after the House Financial Services and Intelligence Committees issued subpoenas to Deutsche Bank and Capital One seeking President Trump's tax records. In his request to the court, and here is the link to that if you want to take it to see what that is, Trump asked SCOTUS to block the subpoenas on the ground they go beyond the committee's powers. Justice Ginsburg stayed the lower court decision and ordered the House of Representatives to file a response by Wednesday, December 11, 2019. The cases and issues were then discussed at their private SCOTUS conference. The court decided to take up all the cases. The underlying House case has several defects, and there is a strong likelihood President Trump would win the case. House Oversight is one of 3 committees that this code requires the IRS to turn over individual returns upon request. They requested his taxes for 6 years, 2013 to 2018, long before Pelosi announced her impeachment inquiry, way before the House vote on same, to which Pelosi said Sunday, paraphrased, "We haven't decided to impeach. We are only inquiring about it." And of course, this was written back then, before the impeachment. And the upon request is not as absolute as it seems. The request must still be predicated on a legitimate legislative purpose. SCOTUS has held, I skipped the ruling since previously commented on here many months ago, that there are only 2 valid purposes, both constrained to legislative powers expressly granted by A1, Section 8. 1. An inquiry into making, repealing, or amending an A1, Section 8 law. 2. Oversight of executive administration of an existing law. With respect to 1, a legitimate legislative purpose would be reviewing real estate tax law for possible changes. But then the request should have come from Ways and Means, where tax laws originate, and it should have included requests for tax returns from other big real estate developers also. Singling out only President Donald J. Trump is a fatal defect to this purpose. With respect to 2, after Nixon-Agnew, the tax code was amended to require a special IRS audit of annual POTUS and VPOTUS returns, with the results held in the National Archive. Reviewing those special audits by IRS would be a proper oversight and reform legislative purpose, but only for 2017 to 2018 after President Donald Trump was inaugurated. The earlier 4 years demanded are a fatal defect to this purpose. Both these valid points were raised by President Trump and were already on their way to SCOTUS. Now the committee is trying to cure these fatal request defects by claiming the returns are necessary for impeachment. This raises 4 new issues where President Trump can also win. Impeachment is not a legislative purpose within A1, Section 8. Articles of impeachment have historically been the province of the judiciary, not oversight. The demand was made before the impeachment inquiry unofficially started and cannot be retrospectively cured. And no tax, high crimes, or misdemeanors have even been alleged. Impeachment fishing expeditions are unconstitutional. In my opinion, this case has the potential to set a major constitutional precedent about POTUS harassment via political impeachment. The Constitutional Convention minutes and Federalist number 65 both make it clear why maladministration, the original third test after treason and bribery, which would allow for political impeachment, was replaced by high crimes and misdemeanors. The phrase was borrowed from previous British law, has a specific set of meanings, and does not allow political impeachment. The quest for President Trump's financial records is essentially a legislative and political fishing expedition in an attempt to gain opposition research for their Democrat candidate in the 2020 election. So it appears that this is going to be opposition research for Joe Biden. I think this is what they're trying to do and why they are still pursuing it, even though it is April now. And so, anyway, I needed to share that with you. Then I wanted to point out this post right here because this is interesting. George Papadopoulos says, shortly after Comey signed the third fraudulent FISA warrant in April 2017, both the New York Times and ABC reached out to me within 24 hours of Allie Watkins receiving the leaked FISA warrant, which was sent to her, by the way, by James Wolfe. And, anyway, I was told by them I had a FISA on me. Declassify the warrants. What were you really after, Comey? And this is something that may need to be done, is to declassify not only his warrant, because remember, there were 4 warrants altogether on Trump people. You had Papadopoulos, you had Carter Page, you had Manafort, and you had Flynn. So I think all of them should be declassified so we can find out what exactly they were looking for on all of these people. So I just wanted to share that with you. This is a little poll on Just the News, which is John Solomon's site. Do you think tax dollars should be used to bail out news media organizations, as some Democrats have proposed? Look at the votes. And this is over 20,000 votes, too. And, 100% of them are like, no, they don't deserve any money. I don't think they do either. And then this one, just a reminder of this, because this is from September of 2019. Former House Speaker Paul Ryan reportedly wants to use his position on Fox's board to do something about Trump. Does this maybe explain why we're seeing Donna Brazile and people like her on Fox News all of a sudden? It seems like it came after September of last year. That's about the time these people started coming on, and then they get rid of people like Trish Regan. Yeah, it just seems fishy to me. Okay, and then this right here, I'm almost done, folks. This right here is a list of interesting and quietly overlooked remarks by Secretary Pompeo. It's a good read. It's a lot about China and what was going on. But what I really want to show you down here, there were some very good quotes. You need to look at that. Look at this. This is the Chinese Communist Party report. And it lists governors as hardliners, and then friendly, and then unclear or unknown. So just kind of interesting about that. I'm not sure. Some of them surprised me in some areas, and I know Eric Holcomb is on here. in the friendly. So just a reminder, I wanted to also give you this resource because there are some gubernatorial seats that will be up for election. And so be aware of what your governor is doing. Look into them. See if maybe they need to be replaced. And do what you can to replace them with people that are going to be a little more accommodating. And you can see here, the nice thing about this is it allows you to see what states are up for grabs. And then you can go down here and you can check it out. And you can check here for the next few years too to see. I thought this was kind of handy. So something you might want. And the last thing I've got to share with you is this. Would you like to have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation investigated for medical malpractice and crimes against humanity? Well, your chance to sign this. This petition needs to get 100,000 signatures by May 10th. So right now it has 20,000, 21,000. So go for it, folks. Share it, share it, share it. And remember, if you sign these things, you have to actually fill this out. You click the sign now, and then it sends an email to you, and you're going to have to click on the email to confirm it, okay? So it's not registered until you actually click on that. So there you go. Share it, share it, share it. Let's see how many we can get, okay? So that's what I've got for you on this one. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.